Thank you very much. It's truly a great honor to be here with all of you. And I'll start again with the appreciation for the idea behind this organization and the strategy with which this institution is approaching how to deal with extremism. I'm honored that I'm allowed to share some of my thoughts in this context, framed as faith, freedom, and justice. Islamic approaches to countering extremism and authoritarianism. In about 10 to 15 minutes or so, I want to draw your attention to this topic, which of course, as all of you know, has a profound impact on our society, on our polity, on our policy approaches. And so often, in terms of framing, we see that the only way to deal with extremism and authoritarianism is to approach it through secular ideas. I claim myself or consider myself to be a secular person, but I want to emphasize that this overemphasis or dependence on this idea that there's only secular approach which will help us define and treat extremism and authoritarianism is problematic in itself. I'm not saying discard it, absolutely not. Consider it as one of the tools. Number two, I would argue that, as most of actually all of you in this August hall will understand, that the history of extremism and authoritarianism is long and is very deeply entrenched in societies across ethnicities, across religious divides, from dynastic regimes to authoritarianism, which are some of those who are aggressively secular societies. So religion per se is one of the problems, but not religion per se. The way religion is approached, or the way religion is used, or I would say the way religion is exploited in pursuit of power, in pursuit of piety, and in pursuit of domination. These three ways, power, piety, or the show of it, and the urge to be dominant is what is necessary for us to understand and track whenever you're looking at extremism and authoritarianism. That's why often non-religious or non-traditional approaches will fall flat. I mean, this is, we find it through various academic studies, in academia, in the policy arena, that it is flawed to think of solutions only from one dynamic. So this I wanted to make it clear upfront. Secondly, I think it is very important to understand what we heard yesterday as well, that this tendency to declare all that is opposite to your views as extremist, or anything that you don't like as frame it in authoritarianism. We saw the consequences of the way we framed war on terrorism for 20 years. When you declare something as war, the implications are different. So my case, the case that I'm building today, is that of using, in a creative sense, religious tradition theologically, religious tradition politically, and religious tradition in a historical context to help us push back on extremist tendencies. That's the frame I wanted to mention up front. Now, as I mentioned, that I'll use theological first very briefly. What is the theological basis of when I'm saying there are internal Islamic roots of anti-extremism and authoritarianism? One verse from Quran will be sufficient to make a case, which is La ikraha fid deen. There is no compulsion in religion. This was the most fundamental challenge to all things authoritarian within the Islamic context. My second example comes from a very important case, very briefly, that I'll narrate, which had happened with the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be upon him. And this is, especially I'm mentioning it, because in many Islamic societies today, blasphemy or the charges of blasphemy are your death warrant. If you are even in a passing way, you are condemned to have committed some blasphemy, that is your death warrant. No one will wait for a court of law or jurisprudence to take you there. People will just kill you. There are many countries in South Asia, Africa, Southwest Asia, where such cases are there. To challenge that, and I'm by theological reference, once it happened that in a company of the Prophet of Islam, somebody stood up and challenged him with very strong abusive words, challenging his worldview. The Prophet looked at one of his companions and said, "Can you take care of him?" People sitting there looked at the situation, and some of them were jubilant, who were kind of very rigid in their worldview, and they thought, okay, I mean, follow and see what this companion does to this aggressor. The companion of the Prophet took that person, the one who was kind of abusive, away from the company of the Prophet, gave him some money, and said, "Please leave this town. I don't want to see you in this company because you have a different opinion." Some of those who had followed this companion just to watch, okay, this person is going to be killed or he'll be beheaded or whatever, were quite surprised, and they came back to the Prophet and complained that, "Oh Prophet, you had just asked one of your companions to take care of that guy who had committed blasphemy. And what he did was actually to give him some money, was quite smiling to him and let him go." Prophet said, "He got my message exactly right. That's what I meant. We have no right to do any harm to him. He committed aggression in terms of his voice, in terms of his opinion. All what we can do is not to engage with him. That's all what we can do." I would argue, and many Islamic historians and jurists have used this one case as something which totally oppose all these new blasphemous legal codes in various parts of the country, including in Pakistan, Afghanistan, various other countries. That's my argument. Now you can legitimately challenge me and say that, well, you are telling us from these theological cases, and in practice we don't see this. My counter argument to you will be, please don't look at history as just the moment in which you are living. History is an ongoing process. There is a very long history. And the Western tradition, Christian tradition, Jewish tradition, Hindu tradition, all traditions had gone through different phases. Look at the source. And my argument is, if there is authenticity, credibility in the way you challenge something from within the tradition, from messengers who are part of that society, with knowledge that is credible, authentic, sourced with the main messaging, then you have a strong case. And that's where I find abundance of materials. If you would have given me, if I had more time, for example, or if I'm teaching a course, I can go on and on from the basis from within the religious tradition. I'll mention two more. The most famous case of extremism within the Islamic historical context was what we call Khawarij. Khawarij were there after the Prophet, during the time of the third and the fourth Caliph of Islam, Usman and Ali. And that's the time they were extremists. Many people had argued in the years of war on terror that this modern terrorism that we see in Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Daesh, some ISK now or Taliban, this is exactly a case what had happened within the Islamic context in the early part of the Islamic history. And the only way to challenge these efforts is to find these sources from within Islam. What had happened was, when people challenged the fourth Caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and the first Imam for the Shia Muslims and many mystics in Sufi tradition, when Ali was challenged while he was the Caliph, and his people said, these again the same exactly what had happened in times of the Prophet, that these are the people who are challenging you. Ali said, let them go out. And first he said to them, let them speak. Let them speak. There is no harm in saying what they want to say, and we will hear that in the mosque. At second stage, they were pushed out. In third stage, there were negotiations. And I'm not borrowing this word for today. The model that was used was negotiations. Secondly, when the Khawarij started using violence, then use of force was adopted. And in the third stage, I'll give you an example. When the situation initially, there were negotiations, when they failed, force was used. Most of the people, there was a battle, most of the Khawarij, almost 90% of them were killed. And when they were killed, somebody said, okay, just get a ditch out there and put everyone in this ditch and get rid of them. And he said, no, we will have their proper funerals and we will do what we do in any case of any Muslim tradition. Later on, people were much surprised because he said, we would not give up if the main principles, the main central ideals, if the other side is giving up on those. We will stick to the ideals the way we want to approach. This is an issue which is very entrenched in mainstream Islamic discourse. Last but not the least is the major story of Karbala, where the grandson of Prophet was killed alongside his 70-odd members by the ruling caliph of the time, Yazid. Ask any Muslim majority state, ask anyone whether anyone would like to associate themselves with Yazid today, in a Muslim context I'm talking about. If there is hardly even 1%, I'll be very, very surprised. You will not find even 1%. Just Google how many people put their names as Hussein versus those who put their names on Yazid. Any one of you interested in Islamic history and the Islamic roots of countering authoritarianism should study Karbala, because that is where a stand was taken against, and there was defiance against the Muslim authority, and this person Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet. The case I'm making is, from within the Muslim tradition, there's strong evidence. Now, I'll end with the second argument, which you can legitimately say that what the examples that I've given are 1400 years ago. Now, I'll give you 4 examples of the counter-violent extremism models that are being used today. First and foremost, 2004, the Amman message. Very easy to find, just Google Amman, A-M-M-A-N, the capital of Jordan, ammanmessage.com or .org. This is when about 100 or so, a little less, top scholars from all traditions, Sunni, Sufi, and within Sunni, the 4 traditions, within the Shia 3 traditions, also Sufis, Salafis as well, who we may see many of us as problematic, or Wahhabis. Each of their top contenders were were invited in 2004, and they were told, please give us a message of this basic belief of Muslim worldview against extremism. And they all came together with a consensus document. It's long, but if I have to mention 3 points, what they said, number 1 condition for countering extremism within the Islamic tradition is that we are claiming all the top leaders of the Islamic variations, all sects together. There was not a single sect that was missed out from this meeting. They all said, we claim today that every Muslim sect, XYZ, is Islamic and none of them is outside the domain of Islam. Second principle, they said, this whole issue of issuing edicts and fatwas has to be restricted because there are only very qualified religious authorities who can give these statements. And they said, and currently the challenge is there's even a fatwa.com. Anything I want to figure out and get an edict in my favor of what I want, you can do it because people have made business out of it. So that the second thing was no fatwas or no edicts by non-religious or non-authentic authorities. And number 3rd was the most important, I think, which was anti-Takfirism. Takfir is, which tragically became quite powerful idea among the extremists, was just declare Mr. X as somebody that you don't like, and you say the person has violated the basic principles of Islam, and that judgment is good enough to get the person killed. That's called takfir. So they said no takfir of anyone. Even in many Muslim societies, there are small Muslim minority groups which have gone through extreme challenges. Currently, what we saw was ISIS, what they did in Iraq and Syria, some of the Taliban, what they have been doing. So, Amman 2004 was one major contemporary effort. Second was Marrakesh Declaration in 2016. Again, even a larger number of Muslim leaders were invited from across the world, and they gave a phenomenal judgment based on Islamic history. Now, in the previous case was Islamic jurisprudence, the theology. In the second case in Marrakesh, they said, based on Islamic history and principles of jurisprudence, we argue that minorities, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Sikh, whatever minorities live in your society, it is not about tolerance or respecting the minority. It is about equal rights. So well said. We often hear, let's tolerate that. We should be respectful of the opponent. No, it is much less than providing equal rights to every person of belonging to any tradition. That's what this Marrakesh Declaration stood for. And this was Amman Declaration, the king of Jordan was behind it. Marrakesh Declaration, the Marrakesh king was behind it. Then came a Tashkent Declaration, where Central Asian Muslims who had come out of course, the Soviet dogma, the communism worldview, and they were somewhat new to redefining Islam for themselves. And it's a phenomenal document. Given the time, I'll not go into the details, but the principles were pluralism, and they were finding it not as a new strategy, not borrowing from Western tradition or Western terminology. They were saying this has been historically part and parcel of Central Asia. And those of you know who are students of history, even of Afghanistan and Central Asia, mysticism and Sufism, which was one of the major threats to this domination politics, or this politics to force your religion on them. The biggest challenge had come from mystics. Jalaluddin Rumi. Go to any bookstore and you'll find a book on Rumi. Go to any store in many parts of the world, you'll find a book on Sadi, which we were quoting yesterday, or Hafiz, or so many, Ibn Arabi. These were legendary names in Muslim political thought, whose ideas reverberate. That's what they were building on. So the case, it may sound simplistic, but what I wanted in this time to do, give you a theological foundation and theological basis, also political historical context of how Islam had dealt with these issues, and contemporary examples. Now, where to go from here in terms of, because the great thing about this conference, of course, is to talk about ideas which are practical, and I'll close in about 2 to 3 minutes with some practical suggestions. One important idea today is in terms of empowering, rather than trying to choreograph and create new people, because we have seen this. There's many agenda-driven efforts at times, which are very much choreographed for certain political ends. No, you don't have to. You have to make an extra effort to find people who are on the ground making and challenging extremists and empower them. Don't try to create a person who look like you, whose exact terminology you love and who engage with you or who has some political connection. There are people on the ground in every country that you can think of in the Muslim countries. Those who are making up these cases, empower them. How will you empower them? Through publication houses. Through, in this day and age of social media, there are ample opportunities to support such ideals and ideas. You don't have to go far and send people in the field. You will find those forces and those voices. It is just a matter of your choice whether you opt to support these forces and these individuals or not. Secondly, also in many cases, investment in education, and here I would argue, I'll give you one anecdote and I'll stop there. This was I had done a lot of work on Taliban, the couple of books that I wrote for Yale University Press, you can find on internet. I decided a few years ago to go to Madrasa Haqqaniya. Madrasa Haqqaniya was what they call jihad factory, in a sense. This is the New York Times wording, based close to Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And I went there and they said they put all their student body and scholars, and they knew I had written books against extremism, on Taliban and other issues, and this was a group closely aligned with Taliban. They were not giving me the topic of discussion that I had to give a lecture. I went to the hall 5 minutes before that. They gave me the topic. You have to talk about Islam in America. And I said, well, I was here to talk about something on Taliban. And when I started talking, I explained to them that some of the finest and modern scholarship on Islam is taking place in the West. And why it is taking place in the West is because Voltaire, which actually I borrowed from Khalid's book, Khalid's last chapter starts with Voltaire. Voltaire said, to be able to write well, you have to live in a free society. This is Voltaire. And I think that's so true. I mentioned to them, when I mentioned to them the number of books on Islamic jurisprudence that have, and scholarship and theology that have been published in the West are far more powerful and far more in terms of quality and content than anything that is being produced in many Muslim majority countries. They said, why is that so? My argument was, it is that so because freedom allows you to think through these ideals in more effective fashion. To give credit where due, this pro-Taliban group said to me, we would love to have those books. Can you get those books to us? And I was able to with some help, and I would encourage, in fact, this organization as well, to engage with even the most extremist movements and organizations. When you engage with them, you will find many opportunities to put across your viewpoint. And that's what I mean was with the history of faith and freedom and justice within Islam is so well entrenched and strong that it only needs a little bit of push, and you'll see this blooming into a full-fledged movement. Thank you very much for your patience.